Okay, guys. Hey, I'm Kimika Titi. Welcome. I was just doing a live stream responding to a sort of three-tiered um, back and forth between Ted, Coleman Hughes, and then Chris Anderson and Adam Grant, sort of in tandem. And I was playing the initial TED Talk, which I believe is copyrighted because only about 20 minutes after the stream started, YouTube suspended the stream. So I'm not really the type to go into conspiracy theory territory about things being suppressed or shadow banned, but I do think it's interesting that tons and tons of people are able to react and post pre-recorded videos of reactions up onto YouTube, but this was a live stream suspended like in real time. Of course they have like algorithms that can like match the audio from different things. So I don't know what their copyright protection structure looks like, and it is not my intention to steal anyone's work or anything like that. I was simply reacting to the amazing, impressive TED Talk. If you guys want to check it out, feel free to go to the link in my description if you want to watch the full video. That this response that I'm about to read, I just wanted to get to the reading portion of things, is based on. Hi, Kasule. Welcome. So let's get into this. Really, really frustrated by the stream ending, but it's okay. I really want to get to the responses by Adam Grant. That's why I kind of placed him in the thumbnail because it really, really infuriated me. But I do want to just put the path to that point out there first. So it starts off by saying this is written by Coleman Hughes, talking about the kind of behind the scenes that went down before Ted finally decided to publish his TED Talk on colorblindness, which I thought was really good. If you were here for the first part of the stream before it got suspended, it's just so good. So anyway, starts off like any young writer, I'm well aware that an invitation to speak at TED can be a career-changing opportunity. So you can imagine how thrilled I was when I was invited to appear at this year's annual conference. What I could not have imagined from an organization whose tagline is ideas worth spreading is that it would attempt to suppress my own. Kind of interesting, like I'm just reeling from Ted kind of blocking my, you know, reaction to their video, and now it's like, oh, I just hope it isn't because I am reacting to the colorblind video, and I think they're kind of doing a bit of damage control considering the responses. I'm going to get to that. Let's just follow through with this. As an independent podcaster and author, I count myself among the lucky few who can make a living doing what they truly love to do. Nothing about my experience with TED could change that. The reason this story matters is not because I was treated poorly, but because it helps explain how organizations can be captured by an ideological minority that bends even the people at the very top to its will. In that, the story of TED is the story of so many crucial and once trustworthy institutions in American life. Whew, okay, we're getting into it. And just so you know, I have not read this yet. So I'm also kind of going to be giving you a fresh reaction to what I think. Let's go back to the start. This past April, I gave a talk at the yearly TED conference in Vancouver, Canada. In my talk, I defended colorblindness, the idea that we should treat people without regard to race, both in our personal lives and in our public policy. This is also the topic of my forthcoming book. That's awesome. I will keep an eye out for that. Even though a majority of Americans believe that colorblind policies are the right approach. Oh, interesting. I did not know that this was. I will look at that on the side. I don't want it to affect the stream, but I did not know that a majority of Americans believe that color, which makes sense because I'm like, who would object to just like the basic truth of colorblindness? Anyway, we live in a strange moment in which many of our elite believe that colorblindness is, in fact, a Trojan horse for white supremacy. One of these days, I would love to do. I want to do an essay. I just need to sit down and get to it, but I really want to do an essay on symbolism and how I believe symbolism and social media have just messed up our ability to ascribe meaning to things, especially images and words. It's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, so let me know if you'd want to see that. As you might imagine, TED is an unbelievably well-oiled machine. In the weeks and months leading up to the conference, I wrote my talk, revised it in conjunction with the TED's curation team and cleared it with their fact checkers. I have never prepared more thoroughly for a talk. And you can see it when he's talking. If you do watch the video, he is just on it. It is very clear. It is not too incendiary. It's just like the right approach. And so it's very clear that he definitely thoroughly prepared for this. On April 19th, I stepped on stage in front of an audience of nearly 2,000 people and delivered it. TED draws a progressive crowd. So I expected that my talk might upset a handful of people. And indeed, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a handful of scowling faces. But the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. The audience applauded. Some people even stood up. Throughout the meals and in the hallways, people approached me to say they loved it, and those who disagreed with it offered smart and thoughtful criticisms. But the day after my talk, I heard from Chris Anderson, the head of TED, and he told me that a group called Black at TED, which TED's website describes as an employee resource group that exists to provide a safe space for TED staff who identify as Black, was upset by my talk. Over email, Chris asked if I'd be willing to speak with them privately. I agreed to speak with them on principle, that principle being that you should always speak with your critics because they may expose crucial blind spots in your worldview. No sooner did I agree to speak with them than Chris told me that Black at TED actually was not willing to speak with me. Okay, that's interesting. So, I don't know how I feel about that. Immediately, I was like, okay, so they're upset about it. Maybe they are willing to express their views and what particularly they disliked about that TED talk. Because again, what is there to disagree except to say that no, we should judge people by their skin color? So I don't like the sound of that at all. On the final day, was not actually willing to speak with me. I never learned why. I hoped that this strange about face was the end of the drama, but it was only the beginning. Okay, on the final day of the conference, TED held its yearly town hall at which the audience can give feedback on the conference. The event opened with two people denouncing my talk back to back. Okay, the first woman called my talk racist because, of course, him talking about not regarding race is racist, interesting, as well as dangerous and irresponsible. Comments that were met with cheers from the crowd. The second commentator, Otho Kerr, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, program director at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, claimed that I was willing to have us slide back into the days of separate but equal, which is ironic because in the video, and he actually says the talk is online, so you can judge for yourself whether those accusations bear any resemblance to reality. What he talks about in the video is that that the colorblind idea of thinking, way of thinking, actually stems back to the abolitionist anti-slavery movement. So to say that this is to bring us back into a movement that was just kind of after that a little bit, I don't know, it's just very ironic and very sad, to be quite fair, to be quite honest, I mean. In response to their comments, Anderson took the mic and thanked them for their remarks. He also reminded the audience that TED can't shy away from controversy on issues that matter so much, a statement I very much agreed with and appreciated. Because he said as much, I left the conference fairly confident that TED would release and promote my talk just like any other, in spite of the staff and audience members who were upset by it. 2 weeks later, Anderson emailed me to tell me that there was blowback on my talk and that some internally are arguing we shouldn't post it. In the email, he told me that the most challenging blowback had come from a well-known social scientist who I later learned was Adam Grant. So I want to talk about his response because we're going to get into that. The Free Press released it today, and it is very interesting. But anyway, we'll get to it. Really glad to see TED offering viewpoint diversity, which, okay, let's get into it. We need more conservative voices. He is immediately just assuming that Coleman Hughes is a conservative, which he is not. But as a social scientist, was dismayed to see Coleman Hughes deliver an inaccurate message. His case for colorblindness is directly contradicted by an extensive body of rigorous research. For the state of the science, see Leslie, Bono, Kim, and Beaver. In a meta-analysis of 296 studies, they found that whereas color-conscious models reduce prejudice and discrimination, color-blind approaches often fail to help and sometimes backfire. Okay. I read the paper that Grant referenced, titled On Melting Pots and Salad Bowls, a meta-analysis of the effects of identity blind and identity conscious. What? I can't even read that. That literally, I don't even know what that is. The effects of identity blind and identity conscious diversity ideologies. Okay. Is that the same? Can we really call this the same, like within the same category of race? Because there is a distinction. If we're going to talk about identity, there's a distinction between, sex identity versus racial identity. So I just find that an interesting blanket term. Why doesn't he just use. Anyway, expecting to find arguments against colorblindness, I was shocked to find that the paper largely supported my talk. In the results section, the authors write that colorblindness is negatively related to stereotyping and is negatively related to prejudice. Why did I say it like that? They also found that meritocracy is negatively related to discrimination. Okay. I wrote back to Anderson. Far from a refutation of my talk, this meta-analysis is closer to an endorsement of it. So this is something that I'm going to come back to that later. The only anti-color blindness finding in the paper is that color blindness and meritocracy are associated with opposing DEI policies. Well, I do oppose race-based DEI policies in most, but not all, cases, unapologetically. But that is a philosophical disagreement, not an example of me delivering incorrect social science. I feel it would be unjustified to release my talk simply because many people disagree with my philosophical perspective. By that standard, most TED Talks would never get released, and I 100% agree with that, Coleman. To which he responded, "Thanks, Coleman. Great note. More soon." Interesting. Wow. Before this email exchange, I hadn't seriously considered the possibility that TED might not post my talk at all. What's more, the fact that the most challenging blowback to my talk was a social science paper showing that colorblindness reduces stereotyping and prejudice puzzled me. I just think it's so sad that a lot of people will talk about listening to Black voices. And, this Anderson figure will listen to the Black at TED group, but it's like there's a certain weighing of experiences between one or the other. Like Coleman Hughes is Black in his experience and his work. If we're to really listen to all Black voices, should not be silenced simply because there is an alternative view. I'm sure a lot of you, if you're subscribed to this channel, already understand that and believe that, but I just think it's sad that even just this response, "Thanks, Coleman, great note, more soon," it grieves me, obviously, but anyway. About a week later, I received an email from Whitney Pennington Rogers, the current affairs curator at TED, and the point person for the curation of my talk. Whitney said that in lieu of releasing my TED Talk normally, TED was inviting me to participate in a moderated conversation that we would publish as an extension of your talk. I'm always happy to converse and debate, so I agreed. Too hastily, in retrospect. I had assumed that the phrase "an extension of your talk" was meant metaphorically, that this moderated conversation would be a separate video. Only later in the email exchange did I realize that it was meant literally. In other words, TED wanted my talk and this moderated conversation to be released as a single combined video. To Coleman's point, the fact that we're it's in this exchange, you see the negatives of a hyper-focused, hypersensitive approach to race relations, in that people cannot, of a different skin color, between different groups of skin color, people cannot even handle an opposing opinion. Not even opposing, it's just simply an idea that not until too long ago was extremely popular, according to this piece, even is still embraced by a majority of Americans. So it the fact that they feel the need to even tack a debate to the end of it just to be like, hey, we have to keep this safe, shows that we're really making Americans more fragile, and especially those who identify as marginalized and oppressed because of skin color. The fact that people need to be protected from ideas shows in and of itself that this approach to racial reconciliation, to healing, is not working. You do not want to live like this. I used to live like this, and I do not endorse it. As you can obviously see, this is not effective for growth or progress whatsoever. I had two problems with this. Going back to the essay, I had two problems with this. First, it would hold the release of my TED Talk hostage to the existence of this other moderated conversation, which at the time was not guaranteed to happen at all. Secondly, I worried that tacking a debate to the end of my TED Talk would effectively put an asterisk next to it. It would imply that my argument ought not be heard without also hearing the opposing perspective, that it shouldn't be absorbed without a politically palate cleansing chaser. Given that my talk had passed the initial fact checking, the curation team, and had been cleared by Anderson and Rogers themselves, I saw no reason why it wouldn't be released and promoted as any other talk would be. I told Rogers as much over a Zoom call, but she and I were unable to come to an agreement. I had a follow-up call with Anderson. Oh, because she and I. On that call, he conceded that his employees' anger stemmed from political fight. Okay, thank you. At least he's acknowledging that. But nevertheless asked me to agree to an atypical release strategy. Jeez. Is this not racism, guys? At this point, like, is this not just traditional racism? Like, the length they're going to suppress Coleman Hughes' ideas and make his release atypical. Like, isn't that just, aren't you just being unfair to him because of his skin color and because he's saying things that should not be, according to the narrative, things that someone of his skin color should say? That to me is just, that's sad. Political. In reality, I told him that. The reality I told him was that these non-standard release strategies were intended not to amplify my message, but to dilute it. After all, the whole genesis of this debacle was the fact that certain TED staffers wanted to nix my talk altogether, and Anderson feared an internal firestorm if my talk were released normally. Clearly, the release proposals being pressed upon me were conceived in order to placate angry staffers, not in order to amplify my message 100%. Okay, so they were able to promote his talk at the end of the call. I end up my end of the bargain. TED did not. My talk was posted on the TED website on July 28th. The debate was posted 2 weeks later. By the time the debate came out, I had moved on. I assumed that TED had held up its end of the bargain and was no longer paying close attention. Then on August 15th, Tim Urban, a popular blogger who delivered one of the most viewed TED Talks of all time, pointed out that my talk had only a fraction of the views of every other TED Talk released around the same time. Urban tweeted, "There have been a million talks about race at TED. For this talk, and only for this talk, was the speaker required to publicly debate his points after the talk as a condition for having it posted online. As it is, the lack of standard promotion by TED has Coleman's talk at about 10% of the views of all of the other talks surrounding his on their site." Anderson is going to address this in his response, but I do think it's interesting, and I think TED and YouTube have some sort of extraordinary relationship. Again, I don't want to be biased and I don't want to be conspiratorial, if that's even a word, but my stream was just suspended for reacting to a TED video, so I don't know. I think it's just very interesting, all of the facts that are coming together right now at this point. 2 weeks later, I checked to see if Tim was onto something. As of August 17th, the two talks released just before mine had 500K and 700K views respectively on TED's website. The two talks released immediately after mine, videos that had less time to circulate than mine, had 400K, about 500K views respectively. My talk, by comparison, had 70K views, only 16% of the views of the lowest performing video in its immediate vicinity. And given how well received this essay has been, And the fact of the title of his talk, which is why what was the name of his talk? I will remember it in a bit. Anyway, my debate with Jamel Bouye. I am so sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. A New York Times columnist with almost 500,000 followers on X, formerly Twitter, has performed even worse on TED's website. As of Tuesday, September 19th, after having over a month to circulate, it has a whopping 5K views. That makes it the third worst performing video released by TED in all of 2023. Either my TED content is performing extremely poorly because it is far less interesting than most of TED's content, or TED deliberately is not promoting it. A string of evidence points to the latter explanation. Unique among the TED Talks released around the same time as mine, my talk has still not been reposted to the TED Talks Daily podcast. In fact, it was not even posted to YouTube until I sent an email inquiry. According to its website, TED's mission is to discover and spread ideas that spark imagination, embrace possibility, and catalyze impact. They claim to be devoted to curiosity, reason, wonder, and the pursuit of knowledge, without an agenda. My experience suggests otherwise, with TED falling far short of those ambitions and instead displaying all the hallmarks of an institution captured by the new progressive orthodoxy. TED's leadership must decide whether it wants to do something about it or let the organization become yet another echo chamber. All right. So, I don't really know what to say, except I agree with everything Coleman Hughes is arguing. Of course, I wasn't there, so I don't know what the back and forth might have been between him and Chris Anderson, who I believe is the founder or CEO of TED. But I just think the overall treatment of his talk and how it was to be released and tacking on a debate to it is absolutely it would be fair if this was something that they commonly did, maybe with other controversial topics, but to kind of single him out is wild to me. And again, given the content of the actual TED Talk, if you guys go and watch it, I have dropped a link in the description below. You can click the link. And in this article from the Free Press, by the way, subscribe to the Free Press. It is awesome. I read the Free Press pretty much weekly. Great trustworthy content that is also not limited to an echo chamber. But ultimately, you can find that TED Talk. In the TED Talk, the way he presents everything is clean, is clear, and he immediately strikes down the two most common arguments that I find when it comes to discussing colorblindness, which is that colorblindness is an imagining of someone existing without race, which is it's not saying that I absolutely do not see your skin color. Like no one is. We all see race. We can all see people's skin color. I'm sure if you're watching this, you can see that I have African skin tone. I have a dark brown skin tone. Like I have curly hair. Like everyone knows and understands that we can see race and we can maybe, pin where someone comes from. My words right now. You know what I mean. But he strikes down those two common arguments. What was the second one? Anyway, check the video out. And then he also says the core of the colorblind argument is that we want to judge people by their character and not their skin color, which again, who really disagrees with that? And why is there such a trend and a shift away from this common sense approach to anti-racism and into embracing race and illogically calling any calls to shut down race as racist? It does not make sense to me. So now here's the part where I get really infuriated and why after a long spell, I am like, let me hop on a live stream and kind of air out my thoughts because I could not believe these responses. Chris Anderson's is more okay, but I really, really have an issue with Adam Grant's. And if we have a chance to go through the comments, I left a comment there myself, but these are their responses. So let me just make sure that StreamYard is showing this. Let me remove this one for the time being. And let me add the correct window with the new piece. All right, here we go. So Adam Grant and Chris Anderson respond to Coleman Hughes. Yesterday, the Free Press published a piece by Coleman Hughes called "Why is TED Scared of Color Blindness?" And so this is from Adam Grant, who calls himself a social scientist. At the outset, let me be clear. I don't belong to a political party and I don't have an ideological stance on this issue. As a social scientist, I form my opinions based on credible evidence. My concerns about Hughes' talk weren't fueled by the argument he made, but by my perception that his conclusion was inconsistent with the best available data. Let's go into that. In early May, I was asked by TED to offer a confidential assessment of his talk. Who does that? Like, really? Like, who do? Like, I get it, but I also like I wouldn't really. Anyway, I responded with a summary of meta-analysis of research on diversity ideologies spanning 167 independent samples and 296 effect sizes. It appears that Hughes never received my full commentary or my reply explaining why the results pose a major challenge to Hughes' talk. A major challenge? It shouldn't be that serious, y'all. We have people on TED talking about why you need to go vegan. Like, we have people saying all sorts of stuff. I remember Ghislaine Maxwell had a TED talk, y'all. I am not kidding. Like, I think that TED talk might still be up now that she's in jail. It might be taken down. But I don't understand why. Anyway, let's go into it. Let's keep reading. So, here are 3 points that I made. The meta-analysis distinguishes between 3 forms of colorblindness, what the authors call identity-blind approaches. All 3 are either ineffective or counterproductive on key outcomes. A. Ignoring differences, colorblindness, is associated with reduced stereotypes and prejudice. Okay. But fails to protect against discrimination. So colorblindness is associated with reduced stereotypes, which we kind of Coleman talked about in his essay, but fails to protect against discrimination. From the authors, discrimination may be most problematic in organizations where colorblindness prevails. What kind of, like, what is this referring to? Like, is this like an after the fact assessment of discrimination? Because if it is associated with reduced stereotypes and prejudice, then how is prejudice reduced and discrimination lifted? Minimizing differences. So this is another point that, like, as you know, a Ugandan American, I was about to say African American, but that wouldn't articulate it quite well. As a Ugandan American, I have an issue with this particular part because I think this is precisely the sort of outcome, the minimizing of differences, that happens when you take colorblindness out of the picture. You now reduce people to expected stereotypes that they have to perform to. Again, bringing back the fact that colorblindness is associated with reduced stereotypes and prejudice. Correct me if I'm missing something here, because I really feel like I am. C, meritocracy predicts lower discrimination, but also fails to shield against prejudice and stereotypes. Meritocracy predicts lower discrimination, but fails to shield against prejudice and stereotypes. Okay, to make the case for an identity-blind approach, you would need evidence that one or more of these approaches has greater efficacy than a multicultural approach. So this issue, I have a huge frustration with the fact that you'll see throughout the rest of his response, Adam Grant conflates, or at least places, multiculturalism at the end of a spectrum on which colorblindness finds itself on the other end. And I absolutely think this is incorrect. Again, as a Ugandan American, I feel like when you come into a space and you want there to be a sort of colorblind assessment, or at least you want people to see color, to see your history, that's where people assume where you come from. They assume your level of wealth. They assume your mental state, like your mental health. And as someone who doesn't even come from the United States, but finds myself now as a citizen that lives here, it's like I have this history that you won't be able to predict unless I give you my experience, and you have to suspend the associations you might make because of my race. So that to me means that, in my mind, color blindness facilitates room for multicultural acceptance, because you're allowing people to bring their experience and their history to the table that might not be something that you assume on the surface. And their research even shows that it reduces stereotypes, right? Color blindness reduces stereotypes. So he says, he kind of places multiculturalism as the goal here, that somehow color blindness does not foster that, which I disagree with strongly. Unfortunately for Hughes' thesis, the meta-analysis shows the opposite. As the authors conclude, multiculturalism is more consistently associated with improved intergroup relations than any identity-blind ideology, and I just think it's wrong to say that the two cannot coexist. And I have lived that 100%. The most rigorous evidence in the meta-analysis from randomized controlled experiments demonstrates the many ways in which colorblindness can backfire in schools, workplaces, and courtrooms. As a team of experts summarized in a review of the research, shutting our eyes to the complexities of race does not make them disappear, which is what Coleman says at the beginning of his TED Talk. So it's like, I don't understand. Anyway, but does it make it harder to see that colorblindness often creates more problems than it solves? My feedback to TED was not that Hughes' views should be censored or that his voice should be suppressed. It was that to deliver an idea truly worth spreading, it's incumbent on the speakers to engage with the evidence, especially on a topic with high stakes. And Coleman Hughes has his evidence. He presented it in the TED Talk. To just ignore what he brought to the table and say, this is my evidence and my evidence is what's real, is just playing favorites and very, very just not great. Again, he starts this off by saying he does not belong to a political party. And for the most part, I follow him on Instagram, and I do love Adam Grant's posts and ideas, and some of the things he has contributed over the last decade have been eye-opening, but clearly this is rigged, or at least there's a bias and a slant to it. So Rolef Jacobs says, I just opened Coleman's TED Talk now, although I probably need to know most of his arguments. Thank you for bringing to light what happened with Coleman's talk. Yeah. Pick and Choose says, exactly, if the presence of a major challenge to a take was the standard for nixing TED Talks, there wouldn't be any TED Talks. I remember I was trying to get Ghislaine Maxwell's thing taken down. Like, I've been there. Like, I've been on that, like, this talk should not be allowed, but it still stood up. And yeah, it's just, there would be no TED Talks if every opposition was to be taken into consideration. I don't know if I already read this. Yeah, I think I did. My feedback to TED. Oh yeah, I said that. It was to deliver an idea truly worth spreading. It's incumbent on the speakers to engage with the evidence, especially on a topic with high stakes. How did this topic even have high stakes? It's literally a topic on color blindness. I couldn't personally think of a more benign thing to talk about. It's only high stakes for a certain very, very small group that's taken in with a very particular ideology. And because this ideology, and an ideology I too was captivated by, because this ideology makes people incredibly fragile, they have a higher reaction to it. That's the only thing that makes this high stakes. For people who typically are taught anti-fragility, who are taught to engage with opposing ideas with grace, with understanding, without taking it personally to be a personal attack, this is not a high stakes conversation. And that, again, the sort of what do you call it? That phenomenon alone is what really boggles my mind with this scenario, because the proof is right there that you cannot even publish this TED Talk because some people internally in the company disagree with it, is why we need to investigate why this ideology is making people highly sensitive and threatened by ideas. Whew. Anyway, in Hughes' case, I think that would involve one, acknowledging the research showing that colorblindness, or showing that colorblind policies consistently fall short of our ideals, explaining why this might be, and proposing novel ways to solve the problems identified. To have a thoughtful conversation on these topics, I encourage TED to host a dialogue or debate. So that came from Adam Grant. to host a dialogue or debate between Hughes and one of the researchers who studies colorblindness. Needless to say, I was disappointed that it didn't happen, even though they still made him do a debate with someone else. You were disappointed that it didn't happen. Like, I really thought Adam Grant was like an open-minded individual, but you have to understand like the pressure you're putting upon this person just because he happens to be a young black man who doesn't have the same opinions as his group. You are putting such like unreasonable demands, which to me just comes back to racism because you need him to think the way you want him to think. It's so sad to me. This whole thing grieves me, guys. It really grieves me and infuriates me. Although multiculturalism generally has more beneficial outcomes than colorblindness, I cannot say this word. I'm sorry, guys. New research makes it clear that it isn't helpful to make one-sided arguments that multiculturalism is good or colorblindness is good. We won't increase the quality of opportunity without systemic analysis of the risks and unintended consequences of our pet policies. Yeah. Again, he's still pitting multiculturalism as this sort of opposing force to colorblindness when, in my opinion and in my experience as a black woman, a sort of colorblind approach, now take that term with a grain of salt, because what I really mean is an approach where you treat people, allow people to tell you their story without judging them by their appearance. In my experience, when people have taken that approach, there has been a community that embraces culturalism as a result. There have been relationships where diversity is allowed to flourish as a result. So multiculturalism does not exist on the opposite end of the spectrum. Well, this is pick and choose. Almost every TED Talk topic can be construed as high stakes. Exactly. Whether it's environmental, economic, humans, exactly. Technology, 100%. Especially when it's some of the more lifestyle based TED Talks. For me, I always consider those high stakes because you're swaying people's lifestyle choices. Whereas this is sort of just like think and chew on it, like think about it. The sort of arguments about like change your lifestyle for the environment or change your lifestyle and stop eating meat. Those ones are high stakes because people will sort of, alter their decisions in order to listen to these experts without any pushback, and in the long term may harm their lives through that. Panacea. Thank you. Okay. Panacea. I respect that. Thank you so much. Okay, so kind of going back to the piece real quick. So yeah, I would love to live in a colorblind world. This is still Adam Grant. As an organizational psychologist, my understanding is that this isn't the most fruitful path to a fair world. Okay, I would love Adam to just do a piece on what he thinks the most fruitful path to a fair world is, because I don't think it's just one approach. I hear what he's trying to say, but I think it's a huge chunk of the path to a fair world. And I would also love to hear what he thinks would be a path to a fair world. If and when the data supports a different approach, I'm entirely open to changing my mind. So if and when the data I like from people I listen to in my echo chamber say something, he's never going to change his mind unless he's open to even just hearing Coleman Hughes' opinions in this video, or hearing other Black people's views that are not in accordance with the mainstream narrative, like hearing my views, hearing views of other people, hearing Brittany King's views, hearing Africa Brooks' views, hearing Aisha Adekanbi's views, like hear more views and expand that idea that you have. Anyway, I hope Hughes, this is what really, really, really got me. Okay, the multiculturalism thing got me, but this one was upsetting. I hope Hughes is open to changing his, I guess, mind, or open to changing. Oh, his base. I guess what he meant to say is open to changing his mind based on the data we have today. That was confusing for a second. The idea that Hughes has to change his mind based on the data we have today. Like, I get it. If the tables were turned, like I hope Adam, opens his mind a little bit, but to say open to changing his mind, like complete. To me, that it assumes a sort of like 180 flip there, based on the data that he put forth, not what Coleman already presented in his TED talk. And also kind of assuming, it's a little bit of a jab with that today at the end of that, because it's like the ideas that you have are outdated, Coleman. So, um, you know, please catch up with modern society. To me, that is so disrespectful. This last sentence was a mess. Adam, as if you're watching this, do you not think that as someone with the lived experience as a Black American in America, like Coleman Hughes's opinions have real weight behind them? Like the success he has been able to reach, do you think maybe it might be because of some of the ideas and philosophies that he holds? And do you think that the world is a better place if we shut him up or if we allow him to say what he's learned from his experience as a Black individual in America? Um, this was just, again, it just goes to show that these ideas are, and the ideas that Mr. Adam Grant is espousing are kind of, they have a racist undertone, because it's like, hey, I need you to think this way because you thinking freely is hurting yourself. Like to have that that high chair, that high place as a white individual, like if we're playing it by their system, by their race-based system, I think it's absolutely unfair. And I hope Coleman doesn't change his mind, because the data we have today, it's just so wide and varied. You can't just kind of force him into this, like, you know, anyway. Sorry guys. Let me know what you guys think based on this. Badasdan. I have just been responding and reacting to two essays. One is a reaction from Coleman Hughes on how his TED talk was handled. It was a TED talk on colorblindness. And the second are two responses on Coleman's essay from Chris Anderson, who I believe is the CEO. What is he? He is like the president or the TED head, Chris Anderson. So this is Chris Anderson's response that I'm about to get into. But if you guys have any thoughts, drop them in the comments. I would definitely love to hear what you guys think about all of this. In the meantime, I'm going to read Chris's response. First thing to say is that Hughes' piece is a reasonably accurate description of what happened. Okay, that's fair to admit, and that's good. In a nutshell, we invited him to TED to give a talk we knew would be controversial. But the talk ended up causing more upset than we foresaw. So there was pressure from some on our team not to post it. We overrode that. So I think it is good that at the end of the day, they fought to override that opposition. Like this might have just been scrapped altogether, but like seriously, in 2023, we cannot be giving into the tiny minority who are extremely fragile and made fragile by this ideology. Something that I can relate to because I have been there myself. We cannot let that fragility run the course of things for the rest of the people. But nonetheless, the talk has had fewer views than others on the platform, and Coleman is understandably upset by this. Some additional context. First of all, personally, I'm a fan of Coleman. He's off the charts smart, and he's a crystal clear communicator. I love his podcast, even when he brings on guests I disagree with. I was excited he agreed to come to TED. His talk was received with huge enthusiasm by many in the audience, but many others heard it as a dangerous undermining for the fight for progress in race relations. So yes, there was controversy. When people on your team feel like their identity is being attacked, it's right to take pause. And we concluded that some of the essential issues raised by Coleman's talk needed wider discussion, hence the decision to supplement the talk with a debate. Again, every talk needs a wider discussion. Every TED talk needs a wider discussion. I still don't agree with the debate, and I'm glad, I'm glad they were able to post the main TED talk, but I really do not agree with the forced tack at the end with the debate that didn't even perform well. So, was anyone censored here? No. The talk is on our platform, available to be viewed and shared by anyone in the world. Quite a few other speakers from TED 2023 have yet to be posted. What about the low views of the talk? Well, that's a question we ourselves are trying to answer. It's true that the other talks Coleman referred to were shared on the TED Talks Daily podcast, which gives a significant audience boost. His talk so far has not been posted there. It may yet be. Many of our talks never made it onto that podcast, which has its own curation team. The bigger riddle is why views on YouTube have been on the low side. Those views are largely driven by YouTube's algorithms, which are as much a mystery to us as to others. I kind of want to take a little pivot into the Russell Brand thing here because of the whole like YouTube demonetizing him thing, but I just don't know enough about that case, and it seems to be just evolving at a much more rapid pace than I can keep up. So if you have any thoughts about where YouTube is headed, you're free to let me know. But yeah, it's crazy. Badass Dan, you know you are doing something right when they try to attack you or cancel you. Anderson shouldn't be giving into pressure. I agree. And I'm glad that he kind of didn't completely like cave in, but also I just think it's sad that it was such a big deal and such an explosion, and you don't really know the type of threats like maybe people might be um sending his way if he were to publish it. Like you really don't know what's happening on the flip side. um I have a lot of thoughts actually about that. We'll see if there's time to get into that, but I just want to get to the end of this piece real quick. What we do know is this: the people who view it and comment on it, the more people who view it and comment on it, the more likely it is that the talk will be recommended to others and take off. But in any case, already more than 200,000 people have seen the talk or the debate. If that's attempted suppression, we haven't done very well. Coleman, thanks again for coming to TED. The hyper divided world we're in right now is so hard to navigate. It's hard to say anything that matters without sparking anger. At least I acknowledge that he kind of addresses Coleman directly and says, thanks for coming to TED, and acknowledges that we do live in a hyper divided world. And yes, it is hard to say anything without sparking anger. I feel like Anderson was kind of the braver of the two between Adam Grant and Chris Anderson. I think he's kind of the more level headed response here, in my opinion. I see Hughes as a fellow traveler on that journey and truly wish him well. And to his critics, I wish them well too. Many people have been genuinely hurt and offended by what they have heard Hughes say. Genuinely hurt and offended. Okay, let's talk about that for a second. As someone who would have also, I have been in that mindset where I was very hypersensitive to race. Very, very hypersensitive to race. Is that a genuine pain? Yes, it is a real pain. And that's why it is bad to treat this ideology as if it is the sole voice and sole like gavel on race. Because when you teach a hypersensitivity to race, you're sort of lowering that pain threshold, which is my fear and concern when we don't even allow opposing views to enter the picture. The fact that he says, going back to it, the fact that he says people have been genuinely hurt, yes, I believe it. I don't think it's a fake hurt. I don't think it's a superficial offense. People are truly taking that offense. Why? Because this ideology lowers that threshold and makes people weak. And that does not help people in the long run, guys. Like, this creates depression, it creates anxiety, it creates hyper fragility to anything and everything. And that is the problem with it, guys. Mr. Chris Anderson, if you somehow happen to see a snippet of this video, this is what people are talking about. This is why the argument for colorblindness still stays alive and active to this day. It hurts to see people being forced to believe an ideology that cripples them. It hurts because I have been there too. And I genuinely, when you want to talk about this, when you want to share your concerns, you get shut down because of the subsequent hurt that is produced. And then it's just this cycle that is never ending. That's what's so insidious about it, right? Anyway, so this is not what we dream of when we exactly. No one should be taking that serious, should be taking any of these talks to to the level of a personal attack. I believe real progress can be made on this issue by each side getting greater clarity and insight from the other. We share more in common than we know. We all ultimately want a just world in which all can thrive. I agree. If I could wave a wand and replace some of the anger that's been stirred up here on all sides with curiosity and a desire to learn, engage, and understand, that would make me really happy. TED remains committed to its nonpartisan nonprofit status and willingness to embrace the discomfort. Then, if you really are committed to that nonpartisan nonprofit status, please never again ask someone to have to debate their ideas after a TED talk. That just shows that you are in favor of one side, one ideology over another, and just is not true to that mission. Yeah, so this is that. I just wanted to break this down for you guys because it is crazy. Oh yeah, just call me Dan. Thanks, Dan. I was like having trouble pronouncing your username, but the Russell situation is unfolding too fast. It's best to wait for more details. I don't like Rumble, to be honest, Dan. I just feel like it's too much on like I have this sort of view that there is this kind of wild snowballing, like, every extremity, every side kind of has its extremities. And I find Rumble a bit too concentrated on like the extremities of certain ideas. And I also am just generally not really great at hopping on too many social media apps at once. I'm actually considering the deleting my Instagram account because it just takes away from a lot of focus for me personally. So at this time, I am not on Rumble. But like you, I do agree. I am going to wait on more news. I'm just gonna wait. I've been curious about um, looking into the Russell Brand thing, but I think he just put out a response, and I'm right now, my opinion is innocent until proven guilty. And I think the whole demonetization thing on YouTube is extremely alarming and unfair. And so, with these two stances that I'm taking, I'm just waiting to see what else progresses, what else comes out, and then we'll kind of be in a better position to judge everything that's happening. But I just wanted to quickly thank you guys for hanging in there, by the way. I really appreciate you joining the stream and joining the second stream because YouTube took the first one down. So I don't know how I feel about YouTube right now, but I just wanted to go into the comments because I think the response to this whole thing is just as fascinating as it. And thanks for hanging through. I know it's a lot, but it's worth thinking about some of these things. And I am particularly like, my frustration in this day and age is kind of with the race aspect of stuff, with our race relations today. And I think we need more forgiveness. That's something I talk a lot about, more forgiveness in our approach to discussing race relations, solving interpersonal racial tension. And that's something that when I bring that up does meet a lot of pushback. And those are the kind of topics I like to stay on. As well as kind of looking at the psychological working of this ideology that weakens people, that makes them more fragile. But yeah, so let me quickly get into the comments on these, because I think you might find these interesting as I did. Wow, two guys who are so completely and totally full of beep. Coleman Hughes was correct. TED has gone woke. Specifically, to combat Chris Anderson's lie, Coleman's TED Talk has less views on the TED Talk site, specifically because it's being throttled by the TED Talk people. If you go and look at his numbers on YouTube, you see that Hughes Talk is perfectly in line with other TED videos on that platform. So not only is Chris a liar, he's using semantics in a way that is especially deceitful because it's his organization that's throttling down the ability of people to see Hughes's talk. As for Adam Grant, dude, no one trusts your rigorous research. No one. We know what that means in today's academic world. It means that the researchers have a predetermined outcome, and any and all evidence to the contrary is purposefully not included in the final findings. Yep. If somebody, and by the way, guys, I just want to plug Free Press again. I went to their debate recently with the debate, what was it titled? Has the Sexual Revolution Failed? A couple weeks ago. It was phenomenal. I love what Barry Weiss is doing. So I'm grateful that I can look at their content without YouTube ending my stream. So if you want to support them, check out the Free Press on Substack or the FP.com. And yeah, these are all comments from people within their community. Let's see. If someone isn't hurt and offended by a controversial topic, then it's not controversial. Oh, where did that comment go? I guess the comments are loading, so some of them are disappearing as I'm reading them. Oh, wow. Yeah, I think honestly, this is a piece that is getting a lot of traction even as I'm reading it. And I think comments are coming in real time. But I cannot stay on a comment long enough. Let me give it a second while I scroll through. Adam Grant showed his true colors during COVID and during the BLM riots, so he has no credibility here. I'm not quite familiar on what he said during COVID and the BLM riots, but I don't know. And maybe he really is just open-minded. I have to give him that because I'm not too clued in on his ideas on the sort of heterodox slash orthodox level. Yeah, like this person says, I am unfamiliar, and then I think they post a link. Interesting. Um, agree regarding Adam Grant's rigorous research. The telling line for me was when his experts write, discrimination may be most problematic in organizations where colorblindness prevails. Maybe. Um, yeah, I can't tell the nature of that comment if they're being satirical or not. Yet to try, oh, this is all in response to one comment. Let me try and see if there are any new comments to read. Okay, Chris Paramore. If somebody isn't hurt and offended by a controversial topic, then it's not controversial. The solution is to evaluate and correct or perhaps change your mind. To try to shut down the offensive idea is a totalitarian impulse. 100% agree, Chris Paramore, and I love the band Paramore, so extra points for that take right there. These are all responses to that. If you guys aren't familiar with Substack, it is a great platform. The people who run it are just in fact, speaking of like Rumble, someone did say, oh, Dan, I see some comments from you. Odyssey might be better. I'm not familiar with Odyssey. Is that a streaming platform like a YouTube version or competitor? I understand, Kimmy. On Rumble and YouTube only. No Twitter/X, no Instagram or others. YouTube taking your live stream down should be frustrating enough to leave the platform. It almost is. I am thinking about it. They, i.e. YouTube, automatically demonetized Russell's whole channel. Yes, I heard about that, and it was extremely alarming for me. That should not be tolerated right now. I don't even know, like, because some of the stuff that's happening is kind of in the UK, I don't know how to talk about it. So does that make sense? Like, I kind of don't know their laws and policies that well. I don't know if it's worth even getting into that. So I'm kind of waiting for a more universally ethically responsible response, if that makes sense, especially when it comes to the verdict of his accusations and whether there's any meat to that. That's something I'm concerned with at the moment. I'll say this. I do think there can sort of be this unfortunate intersection where, some of the things that he has done are true and also possibly true, allegedly true. I'm not saying they are true just yet. But also they use those true things to sort of usher in a new level of censorship, because I do believe it's already happening. It's just that people are kind of trying to take it to the next level. And of course, using Russell Brand as a, what do you call that? Like an example for people, like, hey, this is what happens when you talk back against like the establishment. This is what happens when you are consistently pushing back on big tech. We find ways to get you. I think it was it Chuck Schumer or someone who was talking about someone else trying to go at the intelligence agencies, and they have 6 ways till Sunday to get back at you. And I know these are not intelligence agencies we're talking about. Maybe they are. I don't know. This could just be a case of someone like, Russell Brand being made an example of for anyone who dares push back against big tech. So that's sort of a verdict, a side way in and thought that I have about the whole thing. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for hanging in with this pretty long live stream. I just think I want to just applaud Coleman Hughes for writing that piece to push back on what went on with his TED talk and just getting it out there. I think sometimes things like this happen. They actually probably happen more often than we realize. And then it's like, I don't want to push back. Like, I'm just so glad that, a mainstream platform would just lift up my voice, and I'm just grateful that they allowed it to be on there with the debate. I'm glad that he pushed back and he actually exposed what went on behind the scenes, and this forced a fuller, more in-depth response from Adam Grant as well as Chris Anderson. And so I just think more level-headed, just responses of where things are becoming unfair needs to come out. Like, I could do better in that field myself. Like, I know I'm a bit shy to get on live streams. And thank you, Dan, for tuning in. Thank you, Pick and Choose, and everyone, RV, who commented. Respect you guys a lot. Thank you for your insight as well. And hopefully we'll see more of the tide turning. Until next time, I'll see you very, very soon. Bye bye for now.